name's Dustin Garner, and today I'd like to have a yarn with you. No, we will not be knitting, if that's what you may have thought from the title of this talk. Having a yarn means having a conversation, and I want to start a conversation with you about an important topic that often goes undiscussed within the psychedelic Renaissance. The word yarn itself comes from the Indigenous group Noongar from Western Australia. And you may be asking yourself, why is a non-Indigenous white guy talking to you about Indigenous groups within the psychedelic Renaissance? Well, I'd like to break the ice and share why I am talking about this topic today and how I came here. So about a year ago, I became really interested in psychedelics because I read many scientific research articles sharing about how effective they are at treating various mental health conditions, from depression to anxiety to OCD and so many others. There were so many studies showing the sheer effectiveness of these substances on the brain and how they can help these mental health conditions. And I've always been interested in healing, so I wanted to go into this field and I wanted to do research in this. Now, I study biochemistry at UC Santa Barbara, so I first was really interested in the chemistry behind these compounds, how they affect the brain, how they affect the neural circuits. And yeah, so I really wanted to go into research in that field. So last April, I attended Chacruna's Psychedelic Liberty Summit because I was hoping that there would be scientists there who would share about the research and I could learn much more than I had previously found online. Now, what I found instead was at the Liberty Summit, there were many Indigenous speakers. And I heard talks from Taita Juan Bautista Agreda Chindoy, from Dayara Tucano, and from Sandor Iron Rope. And each of these people shared about Indigenous people within the psychedelic movement. Now, it turns out, unlike the West, where psychedelics have only been researched in the past 10 to 20 years, psychedelic use in Indigenous groups goes back thousands and thousands of years. There are cave paintings in Africa depicting mushroom gods. There are Mayan mushroom stone carvings, sculptures, and in Peru, there are carvings of chuma cactus use. And much of this use has continued into present day. There are groups in Brazil, Mexico, Texas, who all use psychedelics medicinally, just as the West is starting to look at now. And the speakers at the Psychedelic Liberty Summit were sharing their concerns with the psychedelic Renaissance because their groups have often gone unacknowledged for the knowledge that they possess. And because they've been studying these compounds for thousands and thousands of years, they know so much more about these substances than the West does, who's only been studying for, 10 to 20 years. And unfortunately, often they're not acknowledged within this movement because they don't write peer-reviewed papers about their knowledge, or I don't know, scientists tend to see the knowledge systems as different, so they don't all often work together with various groups. And I just want to say that, again, I'm not Indigenous. I'm not speaking for any group when I say this. This is just what I learned from the talk. And every group is different, and each group has different cultural norms. So this is just what these speakers were sharing. And I had never considered this before. This was a side of the psychedelic Renaissance that never would have occurred to me. So I sort of shifted my interest in the pure chemistry and science of psychedelics to these social issues, that there are groups that aren't being acknowledged within the psychedelic movement. Now, the lack of acknowledgement of Westerners about psychedelic use in Indigenous groups has gone back 400 years, basically to the start of colonization of the Americas. There's a quote from a conquistador named Juan de Cardenas who said, "When taken by the mouth, peyote will cause the wretch who takes them to lose his wits so severely that he sees the devil among other terrible and fearsome apparitions." The conquistadors' goal was to spread Catholicism at all costs, so that when they saw various native groups using psychedelic substances in a ceremonial setting, they completely demonized this. And as a result, the groups had to basically keep secret their use of these substances, which is why for so many centuries, these substances weren't generally known about. Now, the various groups kept this secret until 400 years later when, oh, the picture is not showing up, sorry. I'm gonna have to refresh my page, but a man named R. Gordon Wasson, who was a Wall Street banker, and his wife, Valentina Pavlovna, who was a mycologist, learned about psilocybin mushroom use in indigenous groups. So they traveled to the city, there we go. They traveled to the city of Huautla, Mexico, and met with a healer named Maria Sabina from the Mazatec people. And she gave them a mushroom ceremony, and she told them to keep it secret because she and all other Mazatecs had been keeping the mushroom secret for 400 years now. But unfortunately, when R. Gordon Wasson went back to the States, he publicized it. He published this Life magazine article and published her picture. And as a result, her city became incredibly impacted by tourism for people who were seeking the magic mushroom, as Gordon Wasson called it. And unfortunately, she was ostracized from her community as a result. And that's just one tale of many of when Westerners have been extracting knowledge from Indigenous people. And that also goes to show that without these indigenous groups, psychedelics wouldn't be studied now. The only reason that psilocybin mushrooms are known about are because of Maria Sabina. And this extraction of knowledge has continued to this day. Peyote is endangered as a result of many people who just want to seek drug experiences and have a fun time. And at the same time, many people are trying to become shamans, and as a result, the entire practice of shamanism is becoming commercialized, and many of the indigenous cultures are being endangered as a result. So how do we move past this? How can we move into a state of collaboration with indigenous groups instead of purely extracting information from them? Because that's the goal, to build bridges between groups of people, so everyone is heard within this movement. Now, two indigenous researchers named Drs. Don Bessarab and Bridget Ngandu from Western Australia and Botswana, respectively, used a technique called yarning. And as I said earlier, yarning is having a conversation with people. And it makes sense that having a conversation would be an effective way to do research with indigenous groups, because the way indigenous knowledge works is it's passed down orally from generation to generation. And both Drs. Bessarab and Ngandu used yarning to learn from indigenous groups. Dr. Bessarab studied gender roles in Australia, and Dr. Ngandu studied the AIDS epidemic in Botswana. So neither used yarning to study psychedelics, but the way that yarning works is it could easily be applied to psychedelics too. So how does it work? Now, again, it works just like a normal conversation. This isn't an interview where one person is trying to just gain information from the other person. This is a conversation that goes both ways. And it starts with what's called the social yarn. That's just breaking the ice. It doesn't necessarily have to do with research, but it's just a way for the two people to get to know each other. I did this myself at the beginning of the talk. I shared what brought me to this talk and why I'm studying this subject. So it's a way to ease into this subject matter. And then that transitions into yarn with a purpose, which is trying to ask research questions. I'll pose one specific question that many people are asking within the Western Psychedelic Renaissance at the moment. People are not sure exactly who should be guiding psychedelic experiences. Should it be doctors, therapists, psychologists, or a completely different set of qualifications? Well, many indigenous groups that use psychedelics have their own practices with exactly who should be qualified. So research could be done in about that subject matter. And the questions just come up in a normal conversational setting. And in that way, the research, the knowledge isn't extracted, it's talked about. And the two people get to know each other's practices, and the Indigenous person can share exactly the knowledge that they want shared in the way that they want shared. And this is so important because this would go both ways. The goal here is reciprocity. We want to work together with each other's groups so everyone benefits from the interaction. The researchers benefit from learning more about psychedelics from groups of people who have so much more knowledge about psychedelics than they do. And the Indigenous groups benefit not only monetarily, but also by having their voices heard and being able to share their information in the way that they want to share it. Because, I mean, as I said earlier, I wouldn't be here talking about this subject if not for various Indigenous people sharing their voices. And it's so important to have the groups that are being left out actually talking, because having a diverse amount of perspectives will allow this movement to be so much more than just a mental health movement. And this is so important because this movement is moving incredibly fast. 2 years ago, psychedelics were illegal throughout the entire United States. And now psilocybin mushrooms have been decriminalized in 7 cities and 2 states. And to put that in perspective, 2 weeks ago when I started making this talk, it was only 6 cities and 1 state. So these measures are being put into place really quickly. And not only that, there's this cultural shift that's occurring too. There are TV shows, movies, books, songs written about psychedelics, and they're written in a positive way that shows their benefits, as opposed to 20 years ago where everyone was stigmatized in regards to these substances. And I've seen this myself. One person may have an incredible life-changing experience, and then they share it with another person, and then that person shares it. And this movement is just such a positive feedback loop in terms of how many people are learning. And right now we're at a crossroads where it's not completely been decriminalized or legalized, but we're still talking about this movement, and it's only spreading faster and faster. So it's really important to right now discuss who is being left out by this movement. Why are they, and why can't we all work together in this? And yarning is an incredibly effective research technique that could be used to bridge this gap. There's this feeling that a lot of people talk about when having a psychedelic experience, a feeling of oneness, a feeling of universality. And that's a good feeling when a person is having that psychedelic trip, but it's when you come out of it, it's important to actively apply that oneness, to actually work together with other groups of people and to work together so that we really are all connected and there is really all a universality between us. Now, this movement is all about healing, and there's so much more that can be healed than just mental health. There can be healed divisions between people that have existed for hundreds of years, because now we're at a time where psychedelics are this bridge between different groups of people. So thank you all for listening. If you want to keep the yarn going, feel free to email me at dustingarner64@gmail.com. I'd love to have conversations with all of you, and yeah, have yarns with all of you. So thank you.